Good morning, everybody. I'm Ed Aves. I'm the Managing Director of APDSP, and I want to welcome you to our webinar this morning on the introduction to large format printing substrates and applications. Before I introduce our speaker, let me remind you of a couple things. First, this is your opportunity to ask questions. Our speaker is an expert on this topic. So if there's anything you want to know, by all means, ask the questions. And you can use the Q&A tab on your screen to ask questions. And you can put those questions forth anytime. So don't feel like you need to wait until the end. Ask at any point, and then I will interrupt the speaker if it seems like it's appropriate to have the question addressed right then, or we can save it until the end. Also, this event is being recorded, and I'll post it on the APDSP website later. That's apdsp.org, and you can watch it again or share it with colleagues. So by all means, be ready to watch it again. And with that, let me introduce our speaker. Alex Ried is the Vice President of Strategy for S1 Holdings. S1 is the parent company of Lexjet, Digiprint Supplies, and Brand Management Group. And yesterday, Alex and I went through his presentation, and it is packed with good info. So be ready to learn a lot. And with that, I turn it over to you, Alex.
Perfect. Ed, thank you. I appreciate everybody joining. As you mentioned, we're going to go over some of the really an introduction to large format printing, focusing on a variety of different substrates, applications, and examples, and try to focus and shed some information on some of those different areas. So please speak up. As you mentioned, questions are important, and you can stop me at any time, and we can address those in as much detail as possible without trying to get too granular in the weeds. So moving along, as I mentioned, we're kind of looking at just a general overview, looking at some common substrates. Many of you are probably familiar with, to at least to some degree, but we really want to look at some specific real world applications and referencing back to think about the questions to consider when working with your customers to figure out what are the extra things that we might need to know or want to start to uncover before we get into what should be used to create a particular substrate or application. So some basics at the beginning, and this might be remedial to some, this might be new to others, but is the common printer and ink types that we have in the industry. Obviously, there's a lot more, but for this purpose, we're really looking at aqueous, solvent, and latex. So I'm not really getting into OEMs or names. I figure most are familiar with those, but really the difference between them, pigment dye hybrid on the aqueous side, hybrid being a dye ink and a pigment black that's popular probably in some of the printers that some of you have, solvent latex, which are some of the newer machines, and then obviously you can get into UV curables, direct to garment substrates, sublimation, etc. But for this purpose, we're really targeting on some of the basic smaller machines. So with that, we've got a variety of different coating types that are popular or common throughout all of the different substrates for all of those types of materials, but they tend to lend themselves to line up with one technology or the other. So I want to just touch on very, very briefly. We can get into more chemical instructions and explanations as to why, but that part's not really pertinent for this conversation. But from a high level general standpoint, you have a plain paper, your uncoated bonds, which most everybody is familiar with. A plain or uncoated also works for some of the low cost vinyl materials that you commonly see with solvent and latex, and these are some of the entry level types of materials. We'll get into that a little bit further. An inkjet receptive coating, so something that has an additional layer to allow it to accept certain inks. Microporous are all the glossy things that you see that work on your HP Z series, your Canons, your Epsons. Swallowable, which is becoming obsolete. It's older technology, won't really focus on that too much. Water resistant matte, and this is one that's interesting because it really tends to work as successfully with aqueous as well as latex materials. So some of your water resistant polypropylenes and other types of materials out there tend to be cross compatible across different types, but you can work with your vendor partners. They can probably point you in a proper direction. And then lastly is really a primer or a treated material. So this is something that needs a little bit more than plain to get the better image quality, or something that carries something that's a little bit more color critical. But it also pertains to some of the uncoated bonds. And I know this is a little bit confusing. I won't get into the like I said, into the weeds too much. But in this case, 20 pound doesn't necessarily equal 20 pounds. Because of the way the paper can be made, it can be created to control the dot gain a little bit differently. That could it could result in improved color quality or improved dot control when necessary. So starting with paper types. Paper types is probably one of the most common in the industry for most of you, I would imagine. And really wanted to look at the four basic categories. You know, your photo, what we call paper glossy, your uncoated bond, and your coated bond. So these are really, if you want to look at those in two different categories, photo and paper glossy are very similar in the sense that they're going to have a glossy coating, a satin coating, something that looks more like that traditional photo or poster. The difference being how the construction of the paper itself is made. So a true resin coated photo paper has an extra layer in between the coating and the paper base itself to allow it to accept more ink and ultimately achieve better color, better dynamic range. Your paper glossy is really just think of it as a bond paper with a coating that accepts ink on top of it. So it won't hold as much ink. You might see some cockling where it's going to wave a little bit or curl, but it's going to ultimately do that job, perfect for posters and other types of applications. Uncoated bonds, this is something like we talked about before, can be optimized to improve, but it has no extra layer on top of it. So it's really just a plain sheet of paper. And then your coated bond, which is going to include anything from a high performance matte paper all the way to some of the fine art papers that you might see in different museums that are printed by various inkjet types of technologies. Applications. As I mentioned, we alluded to some of this before. You've got your photography, your high-end individual photographer, your wedding photographer, your fine art papers, and this is the coated matte category where you're looking at a variety of different types of paper substrates, most commonly rag, mold made, alpha cellulose, other specialties. These have a variety of different textures, smooth, matte, cold press, hot press, variety of different things that we could get into at another time. Proofing, very general. It's changed a lot over the course of the last 20 years for sure. But you're really looking at two different types of categories: concept and contract. Contract is when you're working with the Coca-Colas of the world looking for a specific color red. Concept is more of, does that red look like a fire truck? Mostly the concept is really what's targeting this audience if they're doing any sort of application. At least that's my understanding of the audience. Posters, anything probably just short of photo quality, but it's looking at any sort of general POP, point of purchase displays, and really in any sort of retail type of environment. Architectural, line drawings, GIS, mapping. Sure, this audience is probably most familiar with that type of application, as well as other general presentation graphics, courtroom graphics, and short-term signage in the event that paper is the most accessible solution. Okay, and these are just some visual examples of some of those that we mentioned, along with one that we didn't mention, as you can see here in the middle. In the middle, there's a custom wrapping paper. Now, this is something that is newer to the space, most common with page wide, as a matter of fact. So this is kind of a cross between a photo glossy and a photo paper. It does have that satin sheen. It does have that look and feel. There's chemically some slight little differences in order to perform at those optimal speeds. You have your general poster work, your GIS work, your photos, your fine art, and a variety of different other types of things that you could get into with different types of paper. Questions to consider. And this is important. And this is something that I think we'll see a common theme when we look at all these different substrates over the course of this chat, is some of the questions most specifically of where's it going to go? how's it going to be displayed? How long does it need to last? What's the customer using it for? What type of imagery is required? For example, a true high-end photo versus a poster that just looks glossy. There's a variety of different things that we need to consider, which will help lead us towards which material ink type is best suited for this type of application, particularly for those of us that may have different types of ink or printer technologies at our disposal, to make sure that we aren't doing something and over engineering it and driving up costs that don't need to be, to optimize margins of profitability for each of the situations. Next, we have banner types. So banner types, as we've probably all seen, whether from OEM collateral or walking through trade shows or walking through the mall, it's general signage. But in that, you've got two real categories that are probably the buzziest to talk about right now, and that's your PVC, which is your vinyl-based solution, and then you're PVC free. And PVC free is something that many audiences, both in the U.S. and Europe and other places around the world, is obviously moving towards it. It's more green, more earth friendly. It can be a little bit uh, well, there can be challenges from a performance standpoint based off of the PVC free type of material or trade-off. But that's something that really is dependent on the application itself and how it's going to be displayed, positioned, and put up, and then what's the traffic and image requirements that you see. So in the PVC space, you really have four basics. You've got your smooth, which is something that is going to require a higher image quality. You've got your blockout and your double-sided. So think of some of the maybe hanging signage where you see that you might need double-sided in a trade show type of environment where you might need viewability on both sides. Your pole banner, and this is something that we'll talk about in a minute, is something that requires a higher strength. And these are what you see on the side of the road that has to withstand, I'm not sure where everyone is based, in our home office area of Sarasota, Florida, those on the street require some interesting things this last week because we had to deal with other things that were causing problems. Backlit, these you've seen. It's less common with a vinyl these days. Things have moved more to film, but it's still pertinent enough, and still things are around enough that you need to consider that as a viable solution. Your PVC free, your polypropylenes, and this is going to perform very well outdoors. It's going to perform very well in different types of stands, and you'll see some examples in a minute. Your fabric, which is going to largely be extruded polyester, that could have a variety of different types of weave patterns, which could impact image quality and possibly even texture. But generally speaking, the substrate itself is really a fabric or an extruded fabric, which could also be recycled. And then Tyvek. Tyvek's a long-standing example, which you've probably seen at some point. Your FedEx shipment bags and other things. Applications themselves. So these are really some of the basics. Paper, banner. You have short-term signage. You have general signage from the Go Tigers on the weekend for the Little League baseball team. You've got your banner stand graphics in retail environments, in trade show environments, things that need to roll up and retract and hold their image quality without being destroyed when it is repetitively being used. Event and trade show signage, directional signage, hanging signs where, okay, what aisle? Looking for HP, for Canon, for whoever. Okay, what's their booth number? How can I find them? Your hanging signs, this is what we talked about before, from the double-sided or smoother double-sided types of banners that will help you when those types of viewing requirements are necessary. And then pole banners, as I mentioned, requires the highest strength, or really what's referred to as denier. So denier is going to be listed most likely on all technical data sheets for all of a variety of types of vinyl materials. So you're looking for something 1,000 by 1,000 or better. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much there, but the higher it is, the higher the numbers, the stronger it's going to be, just as a general rule of thumb. So some examples of really what we've been talking about, right? And this is going to impact what I might use, not just from an image standpoint or a durability standpoint, but also from a finishing standpoint. In this top picture, the summer festival city park, as you can see, if you look closely, you've got just some hanging wires through grommets. Okay, but one of the things I'll need to consider is there wind? The translucent backlit vinyl, is there light, is there show through that is going to distract based off of where that application is, that final application is going to go, that I need to consider before I select the correct material for the appropriate job. Versus the pole banners, the high strength, the hanging banners that we talked about, the really general point of purchase banners that is more closely mounted against the wall or hanging against the wall. So show through isn't going to matter, weatherability isn't going to matter as much, which might lend itself to a polypropylene or a polyester fabric where maybe a long-term outdoor durability factor is less important because of the environment that it's going in. So again, the repetitive questions. What's the application? Where's it going to go? What size? How big? How's it going to be finished? Meaning grommets. Is it going to be hemmed? With common banner types of materials, you can use banner tape is a very common, easy way to basically fold over and reinforce the edges, which allow you to hang it without fear of risk of it tearing and weatherability being a problem. Get you a little more durability out of the material. Again, how long is going to last, traffic environments, viewing conditions. Viewing conditions is something that is also very important and needs to be considered because the smoothness or image capability of some of the materials will change a little bit. But if it's hanging 20 feet above your head, I don't necessarily need the highest image quality. I need it to be stronger, to be able to hang, to not have any issues with tearing, because it's not going to be viewed from an environment where it's immediately in your face, like a point of purchase display at a local mall store would have. Environmental considerations. In this case, we're talking about PVC, vinyl, not necessarily the most friendliest of materials, but you do have a variety of different types of vinyls, some of which maintain a quality called REACH compliance. So REACH compliance is something that's going to get into what are the chemicals that physically make up that vinyl. So there are vinyls that are going to be friendlier than others, and that has to do with a variety of different, like I said, chemicals, phthalates and others that are in it that are worse for the environment. Prop 65 is a California designation that is, I think expanded elsewhere, but it kind of does the same thing, albeit not quite to the same degree. And then other things to consider: denier, strength, fire ratings. Fire ratings, if things are going inside or in a particular type of environment, you need to consider, does it need that? Does it require that? If I'm sending an image and my customer is taking that graphic to a hospital, well, they might require something additional, in which case you'll just need to make sure that you know what their qualifications are, because the likelihood that that exists is high. You just need to know which one, because it might point you in a different direction to make sure it has that necessary paperwork to go along with it. Next, we have adhesive back materials. So adhesive back materials, just like the banners, you've got PVC and PVC free. And then you've also got some other, let's call them more specialty types. Your perforated graphics for your window films with some level, small or large, of show through or visibility through one way or two way. Specialty, so high traffic. Again, where is it going to go, which we'll talk about repetitively throughout this, but is it going on a floor? Is it going on a carpet? Is it going on concrete or wherever it's going? We need to make sure that the adhesive itself is compatible with what it's going on, because there is a big difference between one type and another. And one adhesive vinyl, just like the 20-pound bond, does not necessarily equal the other, because you've got a variety of different factors you need to consider. So going back to the PVC, so you've got some of the clearest designations on the adhesive back are calendared and cast. Calendared and cast is the most common. You've got your entry level, mostly your monomerics. So these are your lowest quality. They tend to have the highest propensity to shrink or change change size one direction or another. And then you go into intermediate, which is, think of it kind of a cross between a high-end calendared or a cross between a monomeric polymeric or all the way to a polymeric. So this is just going to be the most dimensionally stable. So if it's going to go into an environment where you're worried about how long it's going to stay and how long it's going to look, those are things that just might be considered. They don't have to be, but the likelihood that your partner, your supplier partner, would be able to share that type of information with you. Cast is the most durable. So we're probably familiar with 3M's 180C, maybe some HP, some GF, some others out there. Those are most common in vehicles because they're the most durably, long-term durability is the highest with the cast solutions. It'll also allow you to go over more complex or riveted solutions. So adhering to something other than a flat surface. Calendared would have the potentiality to pop up or become unstuck, even if installed properly, whereas the cast is designed to conform better over those complex edges themselves. So some basic examples, a variety of different types of materials. We'll go through a couple different example pages because I feel it's necessary because adhesive back is so broad. You've got your menus, your election signs. Everywhere we go, regardless of where you live. I mean, that's something that is prominent. Obviously, there's other types of printer technologies out there that can do it. UV curable, for example, can print directly on different corrugated solutions. Well, certainly, if you're doing a fleet of those, definitely going to be the best solution to go that way. However, it doesn't mean that with a adhesive polypropylene, adhesive vinyl, other types of adhesive solutions, it doesn't mean that application and job couldn't be taken. You just need to understand where you fit and how many you're doing. Who are you going against? How many people are they talking to? Your basic sign, your general POP sign. Other examples, high traffic. So high traffic areas, if you look at this example with floor. So floor is something that is, as we've probably all seen over the last couple of years with floor signs, whether it's stay away or 6 feet or just a general promotional graphic. There's specific adhesives that you need to consider. And also slip resistance. So slip resistance is something that is critical when you're talking about a floor graphic solution because you need to make sure you're not installing it into a traffic environment that doesn't carry a rating that creates some sort of liability should somebody slip and fall on a graphic itself. So you see graphics on the floor of a basketball court in college and pro basketball and others probably. It's very similar to some of the materials that we're talking about here, except it requires a certain level of slip resistance or probably texture on top of it. That's just going to make sure that people that are walking over it repetitively will, one, not slip, and two, it allows for high traffic. So it won't have a tendency to delaminate on the corners and cause some other accidental problem. Your concrete graphics, again, these are just two specific examples in arenas that you've probably seen if you've attended a large sporting event, concert, what have you. That's just it's proper type of material for the proper type of installations. So that's more on the specialty side, but I wanted to call out some of those specific examples because it's going to require something a little bit more specialty than some of the basic, intermediate adhesive vinyls that you might be using for many other types of applications and think, well, it worked on my stairs, it'll work on theirs. And that might be true for a day or two, but you need to make sure it's going to work based off of where it's going to go. Lastly, we've kind of touched on a number of these slides is the window graphics. These we've seen in common retail environments, amongst other office types of environments as well. And that depending on the user, there's a couple different layers of dots that basically you have to control the amount of show through or visibility through one side or two side that you can have based off of the desired impact of the final installation. Lastly, if you think back to that cast versus calendared, so these are likely more cast solutions because they're going to be more durable and more permanent installations that you might need to look at lasting some 5-7 years over time in high wind in the case of the train, being washed. So it's one thing again in the graphic to come up, but let's say you put that bus through its car wash. If you don't use the proper type of adhesive on the proper type of vinyl, potentially laminate solution, it could just delaminate itself and then you're stuck doing the job again. So again, I know we're incorporating a lot of this into the same questions, but I feel the need to reinforce it. It's always the question of where is it going, how long it needs to last, what's it being adhered to, does it require lamination? I mentioned the floor ratings and the slip resistance. There are materials. Some are PVC-free fabric materials. HP has some that actually carry a slip resistance with it that allow you to do, I would say, more short-term graphics because you need to clean them. You need to clean the floors more frequently. But it does carry a slip resistance that allow you to do it and install it yourself for very quick turnover graphics, or let's say a weekend trade show, right? Where, okay, it can get a footprint or two, but I need to make sure it stays down and shows you what it needs to show. What direction am I going? Is that north? Is that south? Is that, aisle 4? Lastly, like we were talking about a banner, obviously since this is PVC and PVC free, was the, whoops, I backed up, is the fire ratings and the environmental. Reach and Ecotex. Reach for vinyl. Ecotex is something more common in Europe, but we're starting to see it become more prominent in the US. It's largely a fabric designation, and that's really just the origin of fabric. Think of the same way with paper. You have FSC certification, which my guess is many of you are familiar with. Fire ratings, NFPA, M1 or B1. M1 and B1 are European solutions. They tend to be a higher level of a higher bar to hit in order to achieve that rating. So while we see materials coming from European manufacturers into the U.S., you can feel safe knowing if it carries an M1 or B1 designation, it will pass NFPA. Which is basically the U.S. general commercial designation for most environments. Some are more strict, but you'll know it'll pass. You may need to do an additional step to get additional paperwork. So you'll have to make sure you understand the needs and requirements from your customers. But knowing that you can go back and get it, you can feel confident in going forward with that. So canvas types, this is a pretty more self-explanatory, less complex than some of the others. It's really just the different types of substrates. You've got your common types, your 2/1, your 1/1. This is really the weave. So it's the threading, the fabric is going up and down, and it's how the weaving machine puts it together. So 2/1 is probably the most common, the most popular. It also has the most pronounced texture. 1/1, think of more of a photo canvas or something like that, that you might see from, some of the photo people out there. Cotton, less used these days just due to the higher inconsistencies and also problems or potential problems when it comes to stretching or sagging. Sometimes if you've worked with canvas and it loses its stretch, sometimes it's just a higher propensity or a higher components of cotton, which are just more impacted by other environmental factors. Polyester, which tends to be your lower cost, not necessarily lower quality, just lower cost because of the way that they're physically produced. Some of these you're starting to see are produced with recycled content. As a plug, HP currently has one that is made out of recycled water bottles. So that's interesting, particularly with this type of customer base that has an interest or tends to be a larger interest in environmental types of considerations and decisions. Your finish, pretty simple, matte, satin, gloss, semi-gloss. You see some specialty ones, metallics, but those are really the basics. So your general applications, for the most part, you have your gallery wraps, which is the top. It's when it's wrapped over the sides. Chances are everyone's seen this. Sometimes mounted or stretch even in a gallery type of environment. It can be mounted to any type of substrate, and that's really dependent on how the artist or producer is looking to have their work displayed. That's a really subjective decision. And then lastly, like I talked about, this is an example of the recycled water bottle canvas. So it's made out of recycled water bottles, just to help with the environmental impact. Just like the others, still need to know where it's going, maybe for slightly different reasons. One, for stretchability and visibility. Opacity, is it hanging in a way where it's got the light behind it? Unlike some of the vinyl solutions, they are less opaque, so you might get some more light showing through, which, depending on where it's going and what the image itself is, you could could get distracting if the image is designed in a certain way that may not be what the customer is ultimately looking for. White point, as I said, stretchability, and then will it or need to be laminated. So most aqueous solutions, I think the general consensus is those should be laminated, whether it's a film or a liquid. It can do either one. Liquids tend to be more forgiving, easier to apply. And these can be with machines or just with a hand roller, the roller itself, a low nip roller that you get at a local Home Depot, and it can apply a proper aqueous-based coating on top of the aqueous laminate. And this can change your finish, could add the fire resistance that we talked about if needed. But it's really just designed to give that extra level of durability. Almost think of it as suntan lotion, going outside. It will just help it last longer without being destroyed. Next, we have film types. So film types, some of the basics, there are others, is really polypropylene, polyester, and to some degree polycarbonate. Polycarbonate, maybe a little more so on the laminate side, but there is printable polycarbonate that is around or has been around for a number of different years. Within polypropylene, it's mostly it is what it is. On the polyester side, you tend to have a little bit more variety. You've clear, your translucent, your white, and this would be pertinent depending on your application. So some of the applications that are common with different film types, when to look at what and what considerations do I need to give from opaqueness, so your opacity. Does light show through it at all? My translucency, is it a backlit type of application? Is it the airport graphic? Is it a retail graphic, or just a general point of purchase display where I want that light behind it to give it that extra pop? Your window applications, your transparency, and I'm sorry, then the transparency, right? And this might be something that some of you are more familiar with, perhaps in your overlays and some of your traditional AEC type graphics, where more in that sort of environment, so less point of purchase display and more usability. From the terms themselves, I mean, I think that we're probably familiar with this, but just in case, wanted to throw this in there. The opacity, translucency, and transparency is just the different level of light show through. So again, in a traffic environment, if I have a banner stand and I'm looking for a film, but it's a highly brightly lit trade show floor where light's coming from everywhere, well, I might opt for that higher level of opacity to make sure that light doesn't accidentally show through it, as opposed to a backlit solution where I need that translucency, because the opacity would show, the opaque version would show nothing, and it would ultimately be the wrong solution. So different applications. So as you notice here in the middle, we mentioned backlit. We've all seen it, airports and otherwise. That's again the proper film. Where's it going? How's it going to be up? Your point of purchase, which could be backlit, could just be a high gloss opaque film, depending on how the lighting is displayed and where the graphic itself is going. And you've got your banner stand. And banner stand is probably the one with the film type that you really have a lot of choices in what you're going to use. And one of the biggest things to consider for the banner stand is, where's it going, and how long is it going to last, and how's it going to be used, and how often is it going to be reused? Particularly in a retractable solution, we need to make sure that it is durable enough to not more likely than not rip in a month if I need it to last for 6. So that's definitely something that needs to be considered, like it does in every scenario. The additional requirements in the case of a backlit, some of the translucent films, how's it going to be mounted in the solution? If you're supplying it to somebody who's going to be putting it into a backlit type of structure, you probably need to know a little bit more about that backlit setup, about that backlit framing system, because it may need an extra adhesive that adheres to a piece of plexiglass behind it, but maybe that adhesive would also need to be optically clear, so that way it doesn't detract from the image based off of how the lighting mechanism works behind it. So obviously there's a lot of things. I'd stress to refer to your supplier partners, because they can help steer in the right direction and help understand, based off of the materials that you're using or have access to, which ones specifically would work given the specific application, even when it gets, a little bit more advanced, like a backlit type of solution, and there's more things to consider. Wall covering types. So those of you that have been in earnest for a while, and have gone to different trade shows, print for example, coming up in a few weeks, you've definitely seen an increase in wall covering promotion from some of the different OEM partners, or the large OEMs that are in the marketplace, HP as an example. So with that, you've got a couple of different types of substrates, like we have in other. You've got choices. You've got your vinyl solutions. You've got your vinyl solutions. These are tend to have the most amount of texture, because you can texturize vinyl more than you can texturize anything else. So some of those are very, very important in the market space. You've got some with a woven or non-woven backing. What that's going to dictate is what type of paste I may need, or would be compatible for the proper installation of wherever it's going, which could be dependent on the actual wall that it's going on, drywall versus painted, for example. Type 2 certification is something that needs to be considered. We'll get a little bit more into that. And other options exist with fabric and PET fabric solutions, which may or may not incorporate an adhesive already on it, which would allow you to do more of a self-install, which will also work in a smaller, more of a decal sort of environment as well. So it would work the same way, and you could do a whole wall, but maybe it's a smaller accent wall, or a door, or a graphic for a kid in their room that wants something printed and put up, that allows you to put it up with more easeability. Paper non-woven is more prominent in Europe than it is in the US, but it does exist. You do see them. And then some of the paper solutions have pre-pasted water activation. So basically, instead of a paste, it allows you to basically dip it in water and basically smooth the graphic around. And that really is dependent on the installation process and who you're selling to. So just I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but this is kind of a common slide from the industry that is looking at that particular space as a fast-growing space, as something that's projected over time to be used more and more in different types of materials and different types of spaces, from residential to commercial. It allows you to do things more quickly, change more quickly. Not that you have to, but allows you the flexibility to do that. So that's why in the commercial environment, you're seeing that grow at a higher rate. It's profitable. It allows you one of the largest markups. Custom walls allow you to charge for other types of things for the customers, which is obviously something, depending on your offering, is something that could or should be considered, because obviously it's a for-profit business that we're trying to operate. Note the different pastes and adhesives. So again, this is something that we're going to really want to know, and we're going to touch on again at the end when we talk about some of the common questions that we need to consider. Some of the wall covering examples, installation. From a total graphic side, some of the things you need to consider is, where's the door placement, where's the window placement, how do you line things up. So there's a level of complexity that we'll still need to consider, but it allows you a variety of different substrates and variety of different choices. And if you notice this one down in the bottom left, in this hospital environment, that's one of those areas that is important to remember, again, in that fire rating, in that commercial durability rating, which is type 2. So type 2 is something, and I'm skipping around a little bit, but type 2 is really designed for durability and cleanability in particular. So hospitals require a certain level of cleanability that are more stringent than some of your basic stores or office buildings, where you're less concerned about other environmental factors getting on the walls themselves. So with type 2, again, it's a common word in the market. A lot of materials, vinyl, paper, and otherwise, might carry the designation without any ink on it. But it's also then important to understand, what does it carry once I print on it? Because in some instances, things can be misleading. You want to make sure you're supplying the correct material so you don't expose yourself to any liability based off of where that final print is actually going, and that you're using the proper material. Fire ratings, like we talked about before, M1 and B1 are the European standards. Those will pass NFPA. And then size, installation. Many cases, I would generally recommend that, particularly if you're new to wall covering and you don't have the installation experience, there's local wall covering installation people that probably exist in each city that you're in. There's different networks that you can lean to that can do that. But one of the things that you want to do if you work with them or start working with them or start talking to them is understand their capabilities. Have they done installation with some of these digital printed materials before? Because some of the paste requirements might be different from some of the traditional gravure wall covering printed versions that they've done. And then lastly, the size. You do have some specialty printers, some of your grand format, your super wide printers up to 120 inches wide. And believe it or not, there are some wall covering substrates out there that go that wide. So if that graphic requirement required somebody to print and go seamless because that graphic and that customer wanted it seamless, it is available. It can be done. It's less likely. There's less people that do that, obviously, because the capital investing that is required to get to that size. But it is something that can be done. So just knowing that you can, and it could be somebody that you find to partner with. So lastly, I want to just include a couple different kind of examples, just common types of examples, pictures, but really just to kind of recap, some of the things that we talked about. I mean, it's the substrates themselves allow you to do a lot of different things, and we didn't go into all of it. Obviously, there's a lot more, and I'm sure many of you know other applications that you can do with bond paper or photo paper or any of the applications that we talked about. What we wanted to do is highlight some of the key examples and really stress the questions to consider of keep asking, where is it going? How long is it going to last? How long do I need it to last? And what other considerations need to be taken in order to make sure that I'm arriving at the best solution given my capabilities, and I don't need to over design something, over engineer something, or supply something that is ultimately going to fail because it's the wrong solution that could come back and impact repeat business from that particular customer.
Great, Alex, thank you so much. Lots of info. Attendees, we've got about 15 minutes scheduled for questions. Now's your chance. As you can tell, Alex knows what he's talking about, and he delivered a lot of info. Now's your chance to ask questions if you'd like. Alex, while we're waiting for questions, I've got a couple I'd like to put to you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
First, you mentioned a couple times the fire rating, the NFPA. My question is does every substrate have a fire rating? How easy is it for you to learn if a particular product has one?
That's a good question.
Are they more expensive if it has one?
So both good questions. So fire ratings, the short answer is no. Not every substrate carries a fire rating. However, that being said, it doesn't mean that certain substrates wouldn't pass the rating itself. I mean, obviously with the rating, you might have two products that are created the exact same way that ultimately could be the exact same thing. However, there is testing and expenses going on in the development side to go and get it certified in order to be able to pass it through down to the final end user. So, a big company, I don't want to pull out names, but you might choose to market them differently because of the development expense, operational expense that you're amortizing across different types of things. So the short answer is not every product has it. Not every product can, but many can. And then you've got the variability of fire ratings that I was kind of talking about. You've got your US ratings. And the US rating scale, by the way, goes beyond just that NFPA. There are more advanced ratings, which just simply require higher levels of certification. If you get into those real specific environments, hospitals are a very good example. Their level of requirements is going to be higher than others. So what I want to stress is that it's important to just understand what is the exact requirement, and then talk to your supplier partner, because they'll be able to point you to what will carry that requirement versus Others might have a self-extinguishing characteristic, which will be perfectly safe for most retail trade show types of environments. What they want to do is make sure that if it does accidentally fire up, it's not going to cause and promote a worse fire.
Got it. Understood. Great. So in general, you should ask if you need a fire rating, you should ask your supplier. It's not going to be written on the box, or it's not going to be something that's already
It
standard.
should be in the technical data sheet.
Okay.
Um,
Another question. Some of the products you mentioned have an environmental benefit or environmental rating. And that's an issue that we've been talking about it in APDSP. The green issues were very hot 15 years ago, then seemed to really cool down.
sure.
And now people are talking about it again, but a couple suppliers have told us that they don't even offer recycled bond anymore because the demand was not there. So my question to you is, what have you found the demand to be for these environmental products, and is it generally available?
So generally available is a very tough question, right? Because is there recycled content in certain substrates? Absolutely. It's more prominent in fabrics and other types of solutions where you can really control that recycled content. The challenge with paper is, one, the repulping process is a pretty friendly process to begin with, and you're largely using, again, without getting too much detail, eucalyptus is a very common substrate that the original pulp is being made out of, and it's a very renewable substrate to begin with. And then once you introduce products in the paper making process that is recycled content, recycled pulp, it makes the white point that much more difficult to control. So one of the challenges that you have from a manufacturing standpoint is that it's hard to go back and forth, because the cleaning that needs to be required between the two could unintentionally create flaws in either the non-recycled or one with recycled content. So keeping those separate is key. Now, in terms of demand itself, you're right. I mean, we've definitely seen the same thing. It was the green, and then the kind of the green 2.0 of, yeah, that's nice, but I'm not willing to pay for it. And then, because it is more expensive to produce because you're producing it on such a smaller scale. Ultimately, I think you're going to start to see more and more of that. And I believe, from a manufacturing side, we definitely are seeing more and more of that, but it's still going to take a little bit of time, particularly on some of the photo poster. I think the sooner rather than later, I think we'll see more bond solutions for particularly in that uncoated type of space. Just understand that if it was, I'm making this up, but if it was $10 before, it might not be $10 the same. It might be 11. Again, making up numbers. The point is it's still going to carry a slightly higher price point at the beginning until economies of scale end up matching.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Got it. Right. Yeah, it was more expensive back in
Mhm.
the day too, and we kept hoping demand would create enough supply that the price would change, but and then things just kind of fell off. In 2008,
Yeah.
things fell off the cliff.
Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned white point a couple times. Can you
Mhm.
explain what that means?
Yeah. So white point is I'm not getting the chemical rating of white point, but so basically white point is measured with a device, and it's literally the whiteness of a material itself. You can achieve that in a number of different ways. It can be in the base, in a substrate, in an underlayer. So for example, the photo paper has a polyethylene layer between the paper and the coating itself. The whiteness could be adjusted at any point. And then lastly, it could just be in the inkjet receptive coating as well. So there's pluses and minuses to each of the types of solutions. If you go, the more and more you get into call it the very high end fine art space, they would prefer that white point be adjusted lower or closer to the base of the substrate
Hmm.
manufacturing. Um, and there's a lot of differing opinions on is that necessary. But white point is something that it's really the visibility of a product. I mean, the highest dynamic range, and what that is that's white to black. If you're looking at the image itself, if you're looking at the picture, it's going to look like it pops more the brighter the white or the bluer the white. Because in many cases it goes beyond a level of 100. So if you look at I believe the ratings is a CIE whiteness level. So whiteness, if it goes over 100, which is very common, specifically in most of these types of subjects that we're talking about, it tends to shift more towards the bluer scale. Some of that has to do with the way that we're able to achieve the whiteness, but it also creates the highest dynamic range of color. So in color pop is the biggest important from a high graphic impact standpoint. Again, there's we go down a long list there, but hopefully that's not too in the weeds.
All right, great, thank you. We don't have any other questions, but let me just ask if somebody wants to learn more, if they want more in-depth info, can you recommend a resource for them?
Well, from a resource standpoint, I mean, a lot of the things that I'm talking about today, are something that at S1, whether it's Lexjet and BMG, I'm not trying to keep this as a sales.
No, that's okay.
Talk.
You can.
But
if
that
you've
is
got something there, promote it. Yeah.
No, but that is ultimately what we've really tried to focus on from a teaching standpoint is being that resource, of being a resource that can, get to someone's specialty, whether it's me or otherwise. Less of me these days, but the people that you talk to are very well trained, very well educated when it comes to these types of things, and we certainly have experts in each of those categories, from laminates to finishing to really anything to do with printing from large to small.
Great. So ultimately, if you've got a question and you're working with one of the S1 companies, ask your salesperson, right, for some tips and advice.
Yeah. And if they don't know, there's a variety of other, experts within the company of a couple hundred people that
Great.
We definitely have experts.
We have one question, it looks like came in. Susan, do you want to ask your question? I'm going to turn your microphone on. Susan, do you want to ask a question? Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if this presentation will be available.
Yes, it has been recorded, Susan, and it will be posted on the APDSP website by tomorrow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, I think that's the only question we had then. So Alex, thank you so much for sharing with us today. A great volume of info you've provided, and I'm sure that we'll have lots of people viewing the recording also. And attendees, thank you so much for attending. I hope you learned a lot. And like I said, look for this recording. It will be posted by tomorrow on apdsp.org.
Perfect.
Right. Thanks.
Well, thanks everybody. Ed, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
That ends our webinar for today.